Guten Tag, guten Abend und was hast du? In this special episode of Remember That One War during the 1940s where more Russians died than the rest of the Allied powers that mattered combined, we're going to be talking tanks. More specifically, the Bob Semple tank and the Tsar tank, which are farther away on the spectrum than Ted Cruz and Chuck Schumer fanfiction. Chapter 1. To preface the Tsar tank, it's important to remember this was World War I, and that the Russian Empire was taking just about anything they could get before they got absolutely annihilated by the Central Powers. So the year is 1914, otherwise known as the beginning of the Great War, which came before the half-decent but still slightly flawed war, and four Russian are crafting their nightmarish ideas for what a tank should look like. Should it have tracks? Asks Nikolai Lebedenko. Utter nonsense. It shall have two massive wheels with a 9-meter diameter, and a back wheel that's 1.5 meters high, said Nikolai Yegorovich Zhukovsky. Then a couple other engineers came in. But won't that make the wheels too big compared to the rest of the vehicle? Asked Boris Stechkin. Not if the whole thing is 58 feet long and 39 feet wide, said Alexander Mikhali with a perfect imperial measurement. And so with this very accurate historical representation, the four engineers began their work. It's worth noting that a toy model was constructed using metal and a gramophone spring, and Tsar Nicholas II thought it was so cool he gave the engineers the equivalent of thousands of dollars to construct this beast. Nicholas II also kept the model for personal use, whatever that may be. After the whole thing was made and put together, it was 60 tons, compared to the 40 tons they estimated at the beginning of the project. This atrocity also had enough guns to arm a small Bolshevik revolution. 1 to 3 central machine guns on top, 2 cannons on the flank and side, 1 cannon on the top level, and several machine guns on the belly. At the test run, the tank drove at a whopping 10.5 miles per hour, and even snapped a whole birch tree like a verbally abusive parent to a child's dream of becoming a teacher. And after this marvel of engineering overcame obstacles that no other tank could, had the ability to crush houses, and overcame almost any feasible terrain due to its massive wheels and safety clutch to make sure engines didn't overheat, the Tsar tank's back wheel got stuck in mud and couldn't get out, so the project was scrapped. Also, the flawed size wasn't the only reason it failed, since it wasn't very resistant against infantry. You know, the most common resistance on the battlefield besides mud. And there was a very limited line of sight on the turrets. You know, that the tank had at least 9 of. Chapter 2. Now fast forward a little bit, past all the economic depression and rise of fascism stuff. The year is somewhere around 1941, and World War II is on the trails of the peace created after World War I. Germany goes after Poland, Britain goes after Germany, Japan goes after the US, you know the story. So when Britain declared war in 1939, so did New Zealand. Then a little while later, when Japan entered the war, it's a long story of Pacific Island domination, New Zealand was like, hey Japan, old buddy, can we be, not invaded? And Japan's like, no promises, babe. So New Zealand, in all their infinite wisdom and resources, decided they needed a tank to defend themselves. Thing was, they didn't have any resources because the British are massive cucks and Japan controlled basically all the Pacific shipping routes, so they had to make do with what they had, which is basically sheet metal and tractors. After months of researching in the era of military creation and science, which produced such feats as radar technology, U-boats, and the fastest battle planes the world had ever seen up to that point, the brilliance of New Zealand decided this bad boy was ready to head out for defense of the island. To put in perspective what a piece of ingenuity this was, its armor was about half an inch thick, it had 4 machine guns, a 6 to 8 person crew, and a 6-cylinder engine. Keep in mind this whole abomination was constructed from a Caterpillar tractor, showing the Germans that you actually could make a tank from a basic tractor plant. Compare this to the average Japanese tank, the Type 95, which had half-inch thick armor, a 37mm cannon, 2 machine guns, a 3-person crew, and a Mitsubishi A6 120VD air-cooled inline 6-cylinder 14.4-liter diesel engine. So, needless to say, the Bob Semple tank and the Type 95 were no match for each other, and the Bob Semple tank obviously had an upper hand. I hope you remotely enjoyed these 2 tanks that should have been declared war crimes on behalf of the emotional toll I took when researching them, and if you have any constructive criticism, let me know. Thanks for watching, and I just found the sweatshirt I gave my ex from when we dated.